Hi everyone, welcome to the People Analytics Special Interest Group webinar today. We'll get going shortly, we're just going to wait for people to join. There's a poll that should be on your screen if you'd like to respond to that, just to give us an idea of who we've got joining the group and this webinar and what background you're coming from really. We'll just give it a few minutes and then Kat will introduce our speaker, Ashwini, and then we'll get going. Thank you. Hi everyone, I'll just say this again for people who are joining just now. Welcome to our People Analytics Special Interest Group webinar today. We'll get going in a few minutes. Just while everyone's joining the Zoom call, there's a poll that should have appeared on your screen. If you can, feel free if you'd like to respond to that to give us an idea of who we've got joining the call and where you're coming from and what your background is. That'd be great, thank you. And then in a minute or two, Kat will introduce our speaker for today, Ashwini. Thank you. Okay, I think that's the number of people joining seems to have dropped off. So I'm going to hand you over to Kat in a minute. But just before we start, I'd just like to get sort of a plug in for what else we've got going on this year. So we've got this webinar today, and then our plan for the rest of the year is to do a joint event with Warren. So that's Women in OR and Analysis Network. That is it on the 19th of May, and we're going to be helping to create an event that's looking at intersectionality, so the intersection between different protected characteristics. So that will be one to look out for, and there'll be more details about that coming out through the emails from the OR Society shortly and available on the website. And then in July time, date to be confirmed, we'll be looking at events around some talks around well-being and possibly sort of organisational network analysis, something around that. And then in September, we'll hold our AGM. So please keep an eye out for details of the events that are coming up. Thank you. Right, I shall pass you over to Kat, who's going to introduce our speaker for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, so our presentation this afternoon, or the webinar, is going to be on the application of people analytics in smaller organisations. So Ashwini has really kindly agreed to present on this. Ashwini is a people analytics practitioner with nearly a decade's experience across consulting, tech and the fashion industry, including companies such as Uber and Beat, who developed a mobile app that transforms the way people move in cities, and currently with PVH, which is the parent company of Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, amongst others. She's passionate about fixing things and solving problems with data. And having lived in India, Singapore, Japan, and the Netherlands, it's made her an ardent D&I ambassador with a knack of partnership and development, specifically looking at women in tech. Ashwini's presentation today has a couple of opportunities to ask questions, so please pop yourself onto camera if you'd like to answer a question. We will look at the chat, but it might make a better session if we're able to have a bit of a discussion. We're going to follow on the presentation today, looking at some of the questions that Ashwini raises. Thank you. Over to you, Ashwini.
Thank you so much, Kat. And thanks also, Katie, Karen, Katie, all of you for inviting me to join this. As Kat mentioned, I'm Ashwini. I've been in people analytics for about 5 years now, in talent analytics, L&D analytics, compensation and benefits analytics, but all in all in HR. And I still find it super fascinating. And when Kat asked me about, okay, what if there's a nice topic that you would like to share about, I thought it was a really nice opportunity to reflect on what has happened in the last few years. And as Kat mentioned, my previous company was Beat, which is a small company, about 800 people at that time. It's still growing. And that's when we discussed about, okay, in smaller companies, how do we actually use people analytics? Because there's always this thought that, okay, if there's only 800 people, what is your data set like? right? So that's what got us thinking. And let me share my screen. Hopefully it works again. Are you able to see it? Hello? Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay.
And it's gone. I'm back.
I'm back. Okay, great. Super. So that's what got us into this topic. Okay, how can we really apply people analytics within a smaller organizations? And that's where we are right now. For the agenda today, it's about 20 minutes of presentation, but I think there's plenty of opportunities for us to interact a lot more. The reason I love to come and present on my learnings is because I also tend to learn a lot in most of these sessions. So feel free to jump in if you have questions or comments, or even if you find it quite surprising or relatable, just feel free to put it in the chat as well. It's always nice to have an engaging session. Let's start off with a little bit of, okay, what do we mean by analytics in HR? I'm not sure if all of you have been in people analytics, so this is just a quick introduction. And then we'll look into a little bit of a detail on what can you really expect in a small and medium-sized company. So I'll be very transparent here. We are not talking about the tools or the systems that we'll be using in a small and medium-sized company, but more on the concepts that will be very familiar in smaller companies, right? And then also then we can look at, okay, this common question that always comes to me, which is, what do I do if I don't have enough data? Like, how do we work with what we've got, right? And then lastly, I just wanted to conclude with a little bit of an example of a case that did happen in my previous company with some with our approach. And of course, it's open to discussion. Do share if there's something else we could have tried as well. Super. So what is analytics in HR? Basically, this is using any sort of workforce related data, anything about the employees or anything related to compensation, so many different topics around that. And of course, indeed using a little bit of advanced analytics, ultimately to improve the overall business outcome and the employee experience as well, right? So no matter what type of analytics that you're performing, I think it's always important to keep that business value as the line of sight, as the North Star, right? And that's really going to help in amplifying everything else that goes on after that as well. So now, if we look at analytics in HR, you could say that there are different areas that this covers. So in the last couple of years, I think people analytics and generally analytics in HR has become very much popular because employers really want to understand what the employees are going through, and I think they're just looking to HR to help understanding, right? So in the last couple of years, we've also seen a large number of increase in job titles and job posts that comes out from different companies, and most of them are actually small companies which are starting to have people analyst or HR analyst positions. So then we try to dig a little bit deeper on what these job descriptions actually entail, and then, okay, what is the job description of a HR analytics team essentially, and then again workforce, and then people analytics. So as you can see, the HR analytics, most often, if the title or the team is supporting HR analytics, they are really catering towards the stakeholders within the HR team itself. So we are trying to optimize the performance of the HR function all on the whole. So things like, how is ATS being used, or how is a HRIS being used, right? Are people adopting the new software that we are implementing? And then the data quality within the HR team itself. Then there is the topic of workforce analytics, which is a little more complex because we are using more data from the workforce, but really aligning it to the organization itself. So things like organizational health, spans of control, layers of control, all of this can be really directly related to the business metrics also, right? So for example, if there is a reorganization within the company, org restructures happen quite often, especially in the last couple of years with companies which had layoffs and movements, etc. So when this kind of event happens, the business really looks to HR to find out, okay, how is the organization's health currently? Like, do we have correct spans of control? Do we have too many people very far away from the CEO? And is because of that, is there a disconnect in communication, for example? So these were some questions that come from the workforce analytics sides of things. Then there's the people analytics. So this is really talent analytics, right? And this really focuses on people data and their behavioral aspects as well. And these insights can be useful for not only HR, it can be very useful for the managers to take decisions. It can be really useful also for the leadership team to take decisions. Sometimes I've even, in my previous company, we even presented this data that came out of the people analytics and insights to the investors when we have to present, okay, you know what, our hiring is going on really well, but we are also losing people. So give us more budget for keeping the people in the company. So it really has an impact even outside the company to the investors level. So this is in a nutshell what is HR analytics, workforce, and people analytics. Now I think we are moving on to the topic of what can you expect in a small or medium sized company, right? Like where does all of this fit within a small or medium sized company? So when we say a small or medium sized enterprise, essentially we mean something around 500 to 1,000 people. And most often these companies have smaller HR teams because, again, the population itself is not that large. And they also, most often these are startup scale ups, right? So they are in that fast growth mode. So they do have a very dynamic workforce as such. So in this kind of a situation, we're looking at 4 different key scenarios or key points that you will observe. And most often, the first thing that you will observe is that ideally this HR analyst or this people analyst position that you might see in the company is the first one that they've ever created. So pretty much this people analyst is literally landing on the moon, the first person on the team. And until this person has arrived in the team, there was things that was going on totally differently in different parts of the organization. So for example, in my previous company, we were spread across Latin America, Greece, and Amsterdam, even though we were only 800 people at that time. But every team locally had different definitions for everything. So simple things like attrition calculations would be looked at completely differently in Latin America versus what it was in Greece. And so when it is presented to senior leaders, it will look completely, you're comparing apples to oranges, right? So these kind of things it's the first thing that most people will observe when you land in a small and medium sized company. You're most likely the first one to do this. So it is going to look like the data so far has been quite chaotic. So I think the first thing that I found really useful was setting that foundation, right? It goes without saying, it's super important to just understand, okay, what is the current status? How do we leverage any existing knowledge that we have? What is the team doing so far, right? And most often I did find out that there was, even though there was no actual people analyst title until I reached the company, there was someone who was doing part of this job. There was some HR business partner who had a little bit more data analytics knowledge, right? And so it's important to just identify those people because they are going to be influential in this journey throughout. They're going to be the ones that will be your allies and also will be helping you in scale this even further. And I think the second important thing is, of course, the data and definitions. I read this interesting meme that actually talked about how data and definitions and all the foundational things, it's really like the diet and the exercise that you have to do for healthy living. But the analytics and the advanced predictions, etc., is really the dessert and the junk food. So we just really have to work on the foundations before we get to the dessert part, right? So this I think is very relatable to me for sure. Then I think, okay, now we've landed in the company, gone through understanding what is the status quo. So now what can we, where can we go from here, right? So then I think if most of you are on people analytics teams, or if you have seen this before, this is basically from the Josh Burson Academy. And this is actually quite an old one. Like it's been around for quite a while now. And what he recommends is that, look, there are 4 basic steps in order to complete the pyramid of people analytics, right? Like, and you need to go from something that's more reactive and operational reporting. Nearly 50% or more than 50% of the organizations are in this stage. So they're really just starting off with, if a request comes from somebody, you pull a report, you run some numbers, and then you send it back to them. Then there's a little bit of the proactive approach. So that's when you, even before the request comes, you say, okay, hey, every month I'm going to send you the report, use it as you will, right? And then moving on to a little more strategic. So just thinking about, okay, how can we segment the data? who will require what kind of data, and being more strategic and supporting in those strategic initiatives as well. Then there's the predictive analytics. So that's like the cherry on top of your cake, really finding out predictions or strategic planning, supporting the senior leadership team, etc. So that's the end goal most often. And before I joined Beat, so I was working at Uber, which was a much larger organization in itself. So this pyramid totally made sense to me. It totally made sense. You go from reactive, proactive. It's a step-by-step approach. And I think there were also an image which basically said that there are no shortcuts in this pyramid. You go one after the other. But at Beat or any other small and medium-sized company, this is not a direct climb. It's going to be hard if you're mostly the only person in the team, and you're only doing operational reporting as per your plan for 6 months. It's not going to be engaging. And I think it's really important to just figure out, okay, what else can we check so that we can just test the water, just check about, okay, can I do a little bit of proactive reporting as well in between, or maybe for another topic, let me check if I can do some predictions also. Because the way the business works is they have different needs, and so does HR, of course. But you can categorize and say, okay, learning and development, they are in very early stages of analytics. So there, I'm going to do only operational reporting. I don't have too much proactive things that I need to do. But for example, attrition goes up in most companies in the last 2 years. So attrition is something I want to be proactive about. I will give you insights even before it's asked of me, right? And then recruiting analytics, I think many companies actually start with recruiting analytics within HR. So for recruiting analytics, maybe we can even check out strategic, right? So we can say, hey, these sources are the most efficient for us. These sources provide the most high performing employees after the first year of working at Beat. So now this is the resources that we need to spend more money. These could be agencies, these could be job post location, etc. But this will really help in keeping yourself engaged, but also really supporting based on the different business needs and the needs of the HR team as well. So that's what I would like to say. It's really not a straight climb at all. Then I think once you do find out, okay, this is the path I'm taking, I'm going to look at different stages, but different topics, I'm going to go different routes, right? So once you've done that, I think another very key important person is that pollinator. So remember in the previous slides, I did mention that there are those people who have been doing this already, most likely. They are the more data savvy or the data curious folks within the team. This could be within the HR team, or this could also be some of your key stakeholders outside the HR team, or maybe they come from finance, or they could come from corporate strategy, for example. And these are the people, once you identify those people, they are the ones who are going to really help amplify the reach of your work. So they keeping them happy, keeping them on your journey is super valuable, because as and when you scale your efforts, they are the ones who are going to keep pollinating all the interesting data and insights that you're able to provide, right? And I think in the beginning, I did observe that I did have to hold their hand a lot, because there are people of different maturity levels when it comes to data literacy. So some of them were in their previous organizations, they have worked with Tableau dashboards, for example. But there were some who couldn't even do like a simple calculation on Excel. And that's okay, because that's not always part of their scope, right? In their job descriptions. So it's just a matter of taking them on that journey and then telling them what's in it for them to gain by learning this data and analytics, etc. And sometimes I also observed that many times people analytics does not directly report into the CHRO, or this chief people officer, for example, but it usually reports into sometimes compensation and benefits, sometimes talent solutions, sometimes it's even in learning and development, etc. So where you report depending on that, the level of managers awareness of data is also going to be different. So at some point I had to be my own manager, and at some point I also had to really take my manager on this journey with me, so that they are aware of, okay, this is the status quo, this is the plan, this is the kind of data that we're analyzing, and this is how much time this will take, because that expectation setting early on will really help in really scaling the rest of the work that you can keep doing, right? Okay, so now we have all this, the journey set up, we know who our pollinators are, and all of that is ready. Now is the important thing. Now at this point, what happens is the whole company, or at least the important influential people, some within HR, some outside HR, they know of a team called People Analytics. By this point, they already are aware of somebody existing who has all the data, right? And at this point, I figured there were people coming at me from so many different directions for mostly operational requests, right? So it would be reporting requests. It could be like, oh, I'm curious to see what does the data look like on this particular topic, etc. And when this happens, you just feel a bit overwhelmed with the number of requests that come. But I really found this golden circle approach quite useful. This is from the Simon Sinek book as well. But this was really useful because the how and the what is something that comes with experience. Because if you are given a question, you can already tell, okay, this is the data that I'm going to use, so what is covered. But then how am I going to do this? That depends on which tool I want to use. For example, I can do text analysis with R. We could just join the data with SQL, illustrate this with Tableau, etc. So the what and the how is something that as an analyst we get that idea ourselves. But the why, that is very important to clarify with wherever the request is coming from, right? So it's super important to just understand, how is this connected to the North Star? How is this connected to our business strategy or our HR strategy, or just literally our goals as such? And if that is whether or not it is connected is going to help in prioritizing. And if it's not connected, we have to push back, right? And this is the part where I think at one point I did realize that I was saying more no's than yeses. And that's okay, because as long as you're aiming to reach one particular goal, that's your North Star, and you choose the high impact projects, that's okay if you're saying more no's, as long as that's the best way to add the most value and the best use of my own time as well. So this is kind of a good overview of all the different things that I found. So in order to maybe just summarize the three overarching themes that I did find very useful in the journey in a small company, was really communicate and even over communicate if it's necessary, because it's really important to understand with what the stakeholders want, who are the key stakeholders, and going back and forth, giving them something, get feedback, reiterate, etc. So that communication bit really helped a lot. And goes without saying, this is combined with collaboration, right? Because especially in smaller companies, you have smaller teams. So as and when the company scales, most often they become more isolated. So if we cultivate this collaboration from the early on, from early stages of the company, it's something that's really good for the overall teams and overall health of the team as well. Then of course it's enabling. So this, I think I can't emphasize this enough. It seems small because, okay, how do I find time to enable others? Like, how do I find time to teach somebody else? But this is really the most impactful thing I found in the last 2+ years almost. Every time you teach someone, that's the best way you can amplify your work. So enabling the key stakeholders to help themselves really helped in me moving to the more advanced stages. So I got to the dessert faster, you could say. So that was a good, let's say, a good way to motivate myself to help others even more. Even when I was quite jam-packed with priorities, I said, okay, 1 hour a week I spend on teaching something really basic to my key stakeholders. So something like, okay, how do you create a pivot table? How do you create VLOOKUPs on Excel, etc. So then once they know these kind of basics, if they ask for something on an operational reporting perspective, instead of me doing the pivots or the graphs and everything, they already know how to do it. So all I have to do is ensure that they know how to run a report from the HRIS directly, and they can help themselves for the smaller requests. And while I can focus my time and energy into the more advanced questions, which are even more aligned to the business. Right. So this is really my reflection, and I think very nice way to summarize for myself as well. Maybe I will stop here for some questions. Any questions so far? Anybody who feels this is relatable, let me know.
I think I certainly find that relatable. I know we've spoken before, but In my previous organisation, I worked for an organisation with around about 1,000 people who had no formal people analytics. And certainly looking at those foundational aspects, yes, there was somebody in HR that had started to try and do it. You could tell that they came from a background that wasn't necessarily analytical. It wasn't that they were necessarily doing things incorrectly. It was just very different to a way that an analyst would broach it. And I can definitely see those steps. One question I had to ask was around, when you talk about the sort of the pyramid, which I think a lot of people will recognize, it's about expectation management, I guess, because a lot of, I think, stakeholders think that you can jump to predictive analytics without necessarily having a decent HR reporting system, without being able to do the foundational aspects. And whereas I think you can do both in tandem, it's how do you kind of go to that endpoint, show them what people analytics can bring them, and then take them back and say, you can't have that across the board until you improve.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think, as I said, like the way I imagined or experienced it was that in that pyramid, you could be at different levels for different topics. So again, like what you said, we can use that for setting expectations with the chief people officer, for example, and say, hey, on the topic of recruiting, we could go into strategic analytics right now because we have the data set up. It looks good, the data is clean, and the ATS is good, etc. But with the learning and development, we have no data so far, for example, and so we are really starting from the basics. So that's a good way you can use that also for expectation setting.
Thank you. Ruth, you had a question.
Oh, yeah, I did. Sorry, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Really, really interesting so far. I don't know if it's because I'm thinking of even smaller organizations than you are, but you describe a situation where the managers are brimming over with questions which they want to put to the analytics team. What do you do with managers who don't realize that there are questions that they ought to be tackling with an analytical approach rather than just whatever they've always done and going through the processes?
Yeah, I think when it comes to so when you say managers, you're talking about people outside of HR, is it?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So assume, yeah. But even within HR, I suppose if HR in a small organization has basically had the role of recruitment, of providing systems for people management, of and exit interviews, and they kind of going through the processes, but not particularly analytically based, apart from whatever their off-the-shelf system automatically provides them with. What is it? How do you persuade them that there are more exciting things they can be doing?
Yeah, I think what worked well for me, I can relate to that because yes, there are HR BPs who do pretty much everything, right? Like they have to do end-to-end employee life cycle. So yeah, they wouldn't have always the time and effort that they have to put in to understand data. I do relate to that. But I think what really worked well for me is two things. One is what I mentioned as well, like find those pollinators, the ones that can be your allies. So if you find even one person within that small team or even one manager who you can explain and then get their buy-in, they will really help in amplifying it even more. And especially with managers, it's better if they're coming with a little bit more power, so higher up in the leadership team, because they can really influence the teams below them, and then it just kind of goes on and on. And I think especially in smaller companies, power makes a difference, right? Because you with power you get visibility. And so that's something that you can really work and finding those pollinators. But the other thing that also helped is really converting some naysayers, like finding those people who have absolutely no belief that data can be used. And if you find that one person, spend time and effort and then just like keep telling them, hey, do you have any problems that you're working with in your team? Like, is there a low performer? Is there something that you could use data for? And then really continuously pursuing them in order to until the point where they think, okay, this is actually useful for me. And then after that, they will become a huge advocate for you because they were completely on the opposite spectrum, right? So you have changed their mind completely, and often they can become that bigger advocate for the analytics teams. Does it help?
Yes, it does. I'd love it if you had an example of that sort of conversion, which might be coming up in your talk later on, but maybe it's something we could move on to afterwards.
Yeah, I do have examples, but not specifically in convincing the manager or something like that. But let me think about it, and maybe I can come back to you later as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or else we can move on? Okay. I don't see any other hands raised, so let's go on to the next slide. So then this is where we come to the question of, okay, what do I do when I don't have enough data? Because in a small company, it's a perception that, okay, I only have 800 data points, right? If I have 800 employees, I have only 800 data points. So how do I do predictions with just 800 data points, right? But then those are the times when I think I found myself going a bit more creative. But some key things that helped me in finding the data. Firstly, I did look for external market data. I was a bit privileged because I did have budget for my team. I'm not sure if this is always the case in people analytics teams, but I did get a good budget to get any extra resources that I needed. So in that case, I did go ahead and find out, okay, what's out there in the market. I got some nice reports that came from Mercer on attrition topics, on talent movement, performance ratings, etc., etc. And that was really helpful because when you have lesser data, even if you say, hey, attrition was 20% last year, the managers, they wouldn't understand what does 20% mean. Is that too much? Is that too less? And then when you say, hey, the benchmark for tech companies in Europe looks like it's 17%, so we are actually 3% more, then that's why we need to look at, okay, how are we doing enough to keep our employees? So this was something that was really useful in making conversation. And again, I think maybe this could help you as well, Ruth, because sometimes these managers, they wouldn't really trust us with the data immediately. But if you put in Mercer said this, or a very big consultation said this, Deloitte gave this advice, and you put in all those names of these bigger companies that they potentially value, they do kind of want to listen to you even more. So this is something that external market data really adds a lot of value and color to your data. Then I think another very important skill to have is really joining data, because in larger companies, so in my company before Beat, which was Uber, and then also in my current company, which is a much larger company, here we do have the capability of the data and analytics team outside of HR. So that's like, it could be the business intelligence team, whatever the name is, but they are the ones who take care of joining the data. So right now in my current company, I don't have to join the data because everything is already put into a data warehouse, and all I have to do is query what I need, and it's coming from the ATS, the applicant tracking system, the HR system, also the learning and development system, and it's so much easier to just pull everything because already they have done the storage, right? But then when it comes to a smaller company, this resource outside of HR is not always readily available. And when I did approach my data and analytics team in the previous company, they were just very skeptical on storing HR data because, of course, it's got the personal information, right? So they needed even more time and investment to make sure that the data is aggregated only, and then not making sure too much personal information is not available to the rest of the team in the data analytics team, for example. So all of this were extra complications. So it's highly likely that support outside HR is not going to happen. So if that's the case, then a good simple skill that we can learn is really SQL. Just it helps in joining data from different sources. You just get multiple Excel sheets even, and then you're able to figure out how do we join this and how do we make sure that the data looks as clean as it can get, and then the most comprehensive data set that you can use for any further analysis as well. So this is one thing. But the other topic on this topic of joining data is also that most often in these small companies, at least in my past company, it was that I had the liberty to make changes to the source of the data. So for example, I was in charge of the fields that were there in the applicant tracking system, which was Greenhouse, right? So if I found that the end result of what I'm getting in terms of number of days the candidate is in one particular stage, or if I'm understanding the source of a candidate, source of the hire of the candidate, for example, these things look like there's a lot of missing data, then I could go ahead in the system and then make the changes to make sure that the data gets clean. So I would, for example, make a field not a mandatory field, so that I don't want missing data, right? Or else I would make sure that something is not a text field, but I would make sure that it's a drop down. It's given the options for the recruiters to choose from, so they will make minimum error. Because otherwise I'm correcting text like source agency versus agency with the I, or all those spelling errors, and that just makes it much complicated for cleaning, and that takes more time. So that is the time when you really try to take the liberty of all the access that we have. And or if you don't have the access, go and ask for it, because look, I'm monitoring the data output, I want to also monitor the data input. So that way, work together on making sure that the source is cleaner, and that can help in reducing your time investment for the future as well. Then I think last 2 years, because of after the pandemic hit, the employers and basically the business leaders are just really looking to understand what's going on with the employees, right? So surveys became a great deal of data, great source of data as well. Surveys like engagement surveys, pulse surveys, onboarding surveys. So in some companies, they do use more advanced surveying tools. Like I think in my previous company, we did have Culture Amp, which was really good. But then in some companies, when they're really in the starting stages of surveying and engagement surveys, they actually use just simple things like Survey Monkey or a Google form even. And the only important thing is making the more confidential you're able to make the data, that it's not attributed to a particular employee and we're just seeing aggregated data. The more you do that, the more the employees will trust you, and because they trust you, they will tell you their real opinions. So that's the catch over there, to get the most out of those surveys. So I think this is how I think which was three things that really helped me a lot for getting enough data. Because even though there were 800 people, it was not 800 data points. It was, I don't know, 80,000 plus candidates who apply every year. It was I don't know, about 10 to 15 surveys that we had running every year. And so how do we pull the data that comes out of those surveys? So different areas, even LinkedIn Learning, which was our learning and development tool, the number of courses that were taken over the past year, etc., that is not just 800. It's a much larger number. So we can really pull in more data depending on how we want to and what we want to analyze. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
I've got one around data and data systems specifically. Yeah. So you mentioned obviously being in a position where you were able to kind of create and influence the data collection, which is fantastic. I guess, and I don't know if you've got experience of this, if maybe where you haven't got that access, but trying to get that influence. So I've got an example around someone that I'm aware of in terms of absence reporting, particularly during the kind of COVID absence. They were doing Excel spreadsheets as opposed to using the inbuilt functionality on their HR system, because no one filled the HR system in. So rather than investing energy into improving their HR system, they were creating workarounds.
Yeah, it happens. I think what I did was I showed them what is the ideal scenario, right? So when it comes to the first thing I think I did was the source analysis, source of hire analysis, because at one point we had less number of recruiters. So we were going for a lot of agency recruitment, right? But then some agencies are way more expensive than others. And until that point, we did not really look back and see, okay, are they really giving us the output that we're looking for, etc. But agency names were not really registered. So sometimes the recruiters, at the time the candidate was hired, they would just type in the agency name. So it was the same agency was spelled wrongly 3 or 4 times. And when you look at the output data, you can't really make anything out of it, right? Like you're just looking at the same RSH agency in so many different formats, with a dot, without a dot, and all of that. So what I did was, first thing I did was I showed them what could be. So I spent the time on cleaning it. thoroughly cleaning it, sometimes even manually cleaning the data. But then I showed them, look, after this, this is the output you can get. So when you show them the value that it adds, the recruiters were bought in. They understood, okay, so this is how it is. And then I also showed them what it would look if I didn't clean the data. And it's simple graphs. Imagine just simple bar graphs. And then with the cleaning, there are only 6 graphs because only 6 agencies that we are looking at, 6 bars. But without the cleaning, there are, I don't know, I think almost 60 that were there because there were that many spelling errors. So if you show them the difference, they really understood, okay, so this is the value I'm adding in the 30 seconds I take to enter the data. So that's important to show them what's the output and what is the impact of the error as well. And I think after that, I mean, in my case, I did have the responsibility. I didn't have the liberty to change those input fields. But if in case you don't have that, we could use this as an example to tell the person, whoever is responsible for the HRIS, for example, we can tell them that this is the difference it makes. So please change the field. Right, so that could help in getting their buy-in.
Thank you.
Anything else, or we can go on to the brief example as well. Okay, so I just wanted to start off with a very quick example of what the situation was. Oh yes, before that, I just had one quick slide. I think I wanted to say that, look, we can do a lot of ways to find data. We can go running around in so many directions to say, okay, I can have this data. This is interesting. I want to see this. But super important, I always say that the why is before anything else. So no matter what question comes up, or even if it need not even come from someone else, but you could be curious yourself, right? Like, oh, is actually attrition going up or not? So anytime you have any questions out of curiosity, before spending time or effort into it, just ask for the why and then see how anything is aligned. Any of your analysis is aligned to that North Star. It makes a huge difference. I think I learned this only at the end of my first year, because when I did have access to different data points, I was just curious. I put my head into so many different things, spent long hours at work. It's okay, I don't regret it, but the impact started coming more and more after I tried to align with the key strategies and the North Star, essentially. Great. So now going into the example analysis that we did. So the situation was that, yes, we were a scale up of about 850 people. Business was actually booming right before the pandemic hit. So this was in the mobility industry, and the mobility industry, basically it's similar to Uber. So we had to, it's a taxi hailing, right? And there was also delivery as well. So right before the pandemic, we had spread into several cities in Latin America, and it was really taking up really well. And even now, oh, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm going to mute myself for just 1 second. I'm very sorry for that. I'm waiting on a call from my parents because there's something going on. So I just wanted to stay near my phone if there's anything emergency. But yes, going back here. So that was the situation. It was really the mobility industry was taking ahead right after the pandemic hit. Of course, transportation shut down. Every city was in lockdown. So this was an industry that had zero potential to open very quickly as well. But at the same time, because business was booming right before pandemic, we ended up hiring a lot of people. So we had a lot of new joiners with limited knowledge in the beginning, at least. They were onboarding, and then the pandemic hit. So it was a very tough situation for the organization. And on top of this, there was also a lot of organizational changes. The CEO and founder had to leave the company. At the same time, the CFO was leaving. So when things happen in the top, this also makes a bit of an impact on the overall morale of the teams as well, right? And so as a result, we did see that attrition was shooting up. So at this point, we just had to figure out, okay, what's going on? what can we do about attrition? And the question that came from the senior leadership team was pretty much, okay, what's going on with attrition and how do we fix it, right? So that was really the question. And of course, the why in this case was quite clear, because we did not have too much budget to spend on hiring new people, and the market was becoming extremely talent driven, right? So it was a candidate driven market, and because of that, every company was really upping their offer game and their benefits game, and then at that point we just realized we can't compete with these companies, so we just have to figure out how do we retain the people that we have as well and keep them happy and engaged. And when the business starts back and when things go back to potentially normal, we will be able to use the talent that we have and get the most out of jumping back and springing back into action, right? So this is how the situation was. I hope that paints a picture. It was a bit chaotic at that time. But then, so what we did was we tried to look at 4 key data sources. As I said, I really like to start with external market data, because it just helps you understand if you're going through this alone, right? And of course, at that time, we were not going through this alone. Attrition was rampant in most companies, and it was, I think in the beginning they called it hashtag great resignation, and then later it was called hashtag great attraction, and then I think they now call it the great reshuffling, because people were just moving from one to another and from there to here. So it was actually quite a strong pattern that we could see in attrition. People were just generally open to opportunities as a result of the pandemic. They wanted to take risks, they wanted to grow, and they wanted to switch things up a little. And so that's why the external market data really helped to put things in perspective, that we're not alone in this, right? So then the second thing was also we looked at the qualitative data, because the HRBPs were conducting the exit interviews, and we did have some data that came from that. And we within the HR team, we had a little bit of a you could call it as a focus group, and where we asked the HRBPs, okay, what are you hearing from them? What are the common reasons they seem to lose motivation, etc. And we overall understood that the trust in leadership was really little. Understandable, right? But then this is something that came from all the, I think people were sad, people were angry, trust in leadership was really less, and all of this was happening just based on hearsay, so just based on whatever the HRBPs were saying. So at that point we thought, okay, how do we validate this? What do we do to take and understand, is this really happening, or is this something that, sometimes employees just talk a lot, but actually they are performing okay and they're actually not that unhappy as well. So this is what we needed to validate with some data that we could collect within the company. And then secondly, we also found out, okay, look, attrition is bound to happen. We can't stop it, but at least we can find out who are the ones who are highest risk of leaving, and then who do we really want to keep as well. Because let's be real, if a person is underperforming and they are at a high risk of leaving, it's probably okay, because they are a liability to the company at the end of the day. But if somebody is a very high performer, and if they are about to leave, that's going to have bigger impact on the team, on finding a replacement for them is going to be harder, and the cost of replacing a new person joining and them onboarding to get to this high performance level, that time it takes for that point is also going to be much longer. So all this put together, we just wanted to figure out, okay, let's predict who are going to leave, and then we'll figure out how do we focus our efforts into who we really want to keep. So this was kind of our higher level approach on going into this. I'll just quickly tell you also on what was the text analysis that we tried to perform. So my go-to tool was R. So I wasn't actually very good with R until about 2-3 years back, but I think because of how open source the data and the learning for R is, it's been super easy to just navigate your way through it. So I used R for the text analysis. So we collected every sort of text data that's possible, right? So we looked at all sorts of engagement surveys. We also had a lot of questions and comments that came from the all hands meetings. And we also had something called the AMA, which is Ask Me Anything meeting, which actually came as a result of some of our previous analytics. But all of this together, we just figured that there's a lot of text data that we could try and work and understand what's going on in there. And if there's any pattern or any message that we could get out of it. Because although these surveying tools can really help in finding out the answer to multiple choice questions, so you can basically say how many people chose A versus B, but then when it comes to text analytics is not that good in most of these survey softwares. So that's why we had to do this independently outside of the systems as well. And if you are wondering about data privacy and do the employees know? Yes, they knew. We did have once we started using this, or even before that, or in most of the employee contracts, it was already amended that data from the employees will be used for data analysis within people teams. We didn't use things like communication between employees, right? So in an email, we wouldn't read things like that, or a Slack message. All of that was out of reach for us. But things that they voluntarily provided as feedback to the company, those are the things that we tried to analyze. Then in so how did we look into this? So first of all, the place you start when you look at text analysis is understanding word frequencies, right? Finding out what words pop up the most. So that was where we started, and then see what's happening. Maybe is there a theme there? And then of course we looked at, okay, are there some themes when it comes to word associations, and are there some words that keep popping up more often than others? And then we also did a little bit of sentiment analysis. So this is where we wanted to see, this is just for an example, but the real data is different. But basically we wanted to see what's the sentiment look like are people truly sad or angry, or do they actually have they lost the trust in leadership? And what we were able to do also, because we had data for almost 1.5 years since the pandemic started, we almost had 4 engagement surveys. So we had it on a quarterly basis. So we had almost 4 surveys data. So we also tried to see if there was a pattern in the increase or decrease of trust in leadership, for example. And that was interesting to see, because when we tried to correlate that with the events that happened in the company, it was quite obvious that, okay, if a major leader has left the company, trust in leadership goes down. If they were right around the time of performance and promotion cycle, we were not able to provide too much of a pay raise, because again, budget was an issue. And when that happened, immediately right after that, when the engagement survey, the anger level and basically any negative emotion was much higher. So it was nice to see, understand what is the pattern, and then to also see that for everything that we do, there's a reaction. And that reaction is what we need to understand from the employees in order to tame the way that we do things, right? So this is what we tried to do. And then the second bit, as I said, which was on the attrition risk analysis. So we used all the data points that we had for the past several years data, whatever we had on the attrition of the previous leavers. We looked at, we created a multiple regression model. We used about 15 plus factors on things like the rating of the person, manager rating, tenure within the company, managers tenure within the company, the location, and all the demographics data as well. So all of these we used as different factors, and we tried to understand what are the most important factors that affect a person's tendency to leave the company. And based on this model, we also tried to predict who are the employees who are currently active in the company, who are at who have the highest risk of leaving the company. And once we did this, we looked at, okay, how many people per team are we getting this? I think it's usually the high risk people come to about 10 to 12% maximum. We tried to train the model to give about 10 to 12% of the team, of the total employees, because honestly, we can't focus on more people than 12% of your employee population, right? In order to change things, you really need to focus on a smaller population. So that's what we tried to do. And then, of course, in there, we prioritize. So, for example, if we see 10 people from the engineering team, that is a bigger problem, because our engineering team was very core to our rest of the teams, like, for our business to function. I think literally they would say the app will not run if one or two of these people do not join work tomorrow, so that level of influence they had on the work of the business itself. So those kind of things, we work together with the HRBPs to refine that list even more, because of course this is something that I always respect, because I can come with as much data as I want, but the context usually sits with someone else. So it's important to bring that person who has the context to the conversation. And that's the best way you can make the most out of the data and the insights that can come out of it. So that's the way we try to do things. And what we did after this, so based on both of this together, so one, we looked at, okay, what is the actual sentiments of employees, and then also who are the people who are leaving. We combined this, and then we tried to sit together as a HR team, build a strategy on how we take actions going forward. Again, this is something that is not always on the people analyst to decide what actions need to be taken, because again, it comes with the experience within the HR team as well. So it's really nice if you can pull this action plan together with the rest of the team. And so here, initiatives that we try to build initiatives that can help in building the trust. So this one thing that really helped was showing more face time with the leadership. So it really helps for them to have more cameras on conversation, because it was all virtual at that time, and more face time with their employees as well, like skip level conversations that we tried to enable also, which was really useful, because all the employees want to hear is there is someone looking after us, right? They just want to understand that, okay, they are leading us to a better place. Like there is some action plan. There is a way this whole pandemic will turn around and things will get better. So that trust we really need to build back, and we tried to build some nice initiatives around that. Then I think the other thing we wanted to do is, we realized that the engagement surveys actually had a lot of data, but they are lengthy. They are nearly almost 30 plus questions we had, and then again there are open text questions as well. So we figured out, let's figure out a way to get more feedback from our employees, at least during the pandemic, where it's so hard to get enough feedback from them. We had shorter pulse surveys, which were most like, okay, this is the area that we're focusing our actions on, so that is the topic that we're covering in this pulse survey. So every month we had a different topic that was going on, and we just wanted to get more feedback and actively understand what the employees are going for. And the last thing is the HRBPs themselves, once we refined the list of the high-risk employees, they also went ahead and had conversations with these high-risk employees, who are also high performers in some cases, to understand what can be done towards it. Because again, we can say based on data that, hey, these are the things that they're lacking, but it was really important for us to validate this. And the employees also felt more valued when they get a conversation it's almost like a keep conversation, right? Like it's a retention conversation. So they like to be valued that way, and to show them that, yes, we want you to stay. So what can we do to keep you? So that was a nice way to encourage them and motivate them to continue to grow within the organization. I think that's all I had for today. Any questions? I think, as I said, I really like to learn from all of you and your questions. So feel free to open your camera or just put the question on the chat as well.
I think we've probably got time for one quick question. And then if Ashwini's happy, if we've got a contact email address for us, we could forward any further questions on to you, if you don't mind.
No, of course. I'm happy to do that. Sorry, Katie, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. While people are just getting their questions together, if they've got any, I just wanted to reflect on, well, first of all, say thank you for that really interesting talk, but also to reflect on how the things you've brought up and the issues you've talked about, although you're referring to small organisations in that, I think a lot of it is transferable to larger organisations as well anyway, because often you're working with small groups within that organisation, and it's the same things, you're trying to get that first step in there, you're trying to convince people. I like the idea of the pollinators, and the other thing is the why question is really important, whatever you're doing, whether it's people analytics or anything else, isn't it? It's the most important thing. You can do things, you've got data, you can analyze it, but if you're not sure why you're doing it, then there's not really much point, is there? So that's really transferable to a whole load of things. Thank you.
Totally agree.
Any other questions from anyone?
Oh. And Ruth, I got your name on I'm going to look you up on LinkedIn, and I'll come back to you on that later on.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's I think that there's probably a question, because I work with much smaller organizations generally, and there's a question: how small does an organization, or how large does an organization need to be at the point at which it switches over to analytics and hard data being better than what you see around you and just pick up through the grapevine and so on?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it also depends on how big the organization wants to grow. No, if it is a, like in most startup scale up situations, even they might be 50 today, but in 1 year they want to be 300 or 400. So they're really scaling quickly. So if it's that quick scale, then I would say even from the beginning, have someone who's analytical, because then you know as you grow, you are using analytics to say, hey, this is the best place for us to hire. This is the best city for us to hire, even because even location strategy is important in the early stages of business, right? Like, where do we expand next? We can expand to Berlin or Munich. Both are good cities for us, but where can we get talent to do the job for us? So those kind of things, it can really help in the early stages, but it really also depends how big the organization wants to grow.
Thanks.
Does
Thank
it
you.
make sense? Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's Kat, unless there's anything else you want to add, I think I'll wrap this up. Thank you very much, Ashwini. This is a recording as well, and we'll write this up to go into the Inside OR newsletter and on the website as well. So you'll be able to find details of this in those places anyway, and see the recording again. Thank you very much, and thanks for everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.